Well, and this is the thing I really wanted to cover because this is where my memory is quite dim and it's quite important because we've covered a period of time from 1994 to 1996 to DirectX 2. And what was the big feature release of DirectX 2? Do you remember?
Um, was it uh, the Render Morphics API that you'd introduced?
It was Direct 3D,
Uh,
right? So the big
right.
feature, DirectX 2's theme was invading another dimension, and it was the launch of Direct 3D.
Mm.
And so that was the start of Microsoft defining graphics hardware standards for 3D hardware. And as you well know, ATI was acquired years later by AMD, and today AMD chips are which they acquired with ATI, that architect technology, the graphics chips for all modern game consoles. So you were at ATI, and then this is where my memory was faded, right? And in the era when they made the transition from 2D to 3D graphics, how did that happen?
You mentioned 1994, 1993 to 1996.
Yeah,
It was 1996 end of 1996 that I left ATI because they had accomplished what they needed from my group. They
you'd
had
won.
now a Windows API, and they said, "Well, Ken, we don't need you to develop games for Windows anymore. We can get games from anybody. What we want you to be is our demo group. Just build graphics demos showing it." And I said, "That sounds like a marketing role." They said, "Yeah, you'll be working for the marketing side." I said, and I thought, can I have a future in tech or a future in marketing? I had no marketing background. I just said, no, I can't do that. So shut shut
We've
down
made
my
you
group,
great at it,
right?
Ken. Oh God. Oh,
Uh,
that's funny.
so but I remember at that time they had hired a company, or they had uh, in about the same time they started our game development group in San Jose. They had bought a Boston group from Kubota Graphics, Kubota, the tractor, Japanese tractor manufacturer,
Yeah,
and they were investing in 3D because when you're moving Earth, you need to somehow measure how much Earth you're moving and quantity. So they'd invested in 3D graphics, and the early Mach 64 Rage chip was
hmm,
intended to be a 3D graphics accelerator. But in order to get it to draw a triangle, you would set a bunch of registers up and then say, okay, now draw that triangle, and it would draw one triangle with kind of shading from
yeah,
if it's red in this corner, it'll be green in this corner, Garot shading type thing.
yeah,
And then you want to do the next triangle, and so you'd set the registers up and do it again. Well, it took so long to set those registers up. They were memory mapped registers, so it's not the same as like IO registers.
yeah.
But it took so long to set up each
Mhm.
triangle that it became called a graphics decelerator. And so people trying it out found, just give me a pointer to the graphics buffer and I'll do all the drawing myself. I don't need you to
Yeah.
do this one small part.
So just that
And
low
so,
level of triangle rendering was so slow. It was decelerating graphics, so we're just doing it on the CPU. And ATI was kind of the laughing stock for that chip because of that. Everybody would joke about it being the 3D decelerating chip, right?
right. And even though they were among the first
Hmm.
to come out with a chip that supported it, it really wasn't very good. I remember going through the game developers conference and looking for somebody that had something better. And there was in Florida, there was a military graphics company that was doing amazing things because they were offloading more than just the drawing. They were offloading the geometry calculations,
Yeah.
and um, and then for people that are interested in the history of how ATI went beyond this kind of primitive
Yeah.
graphics accelerator, they eventually acquired a company called ArtX.
Yeah.
ArtX was a bunch of engineers that spun off from SGI, and the best engineers probably. And they were planning to do the next generation 3D chip, and then ATI, of course, bought the company, and that kind of catalyzed the transition of ATI to being more oriented toward 3D instead of being a 2D graphics accelerator
Right.
with its old roots in just blitters.
So
And
what came first, the NVIDIA GPU or the ATI GPU?
Well, interestingly, when I was at SGI, I was kind of in charge of a team that was working with Microsoft on something called Fahrenheit.
Hmm.
There was the DirectX
What year
graphics
was this? What
API.
year was that?
Let's see. SGI was 1999, so we're jumping forward a few years.
Yeah.
Um, so SGI, of course, had the Iris system. They had very, very expensive. And I remember talking to one engineer who said, "My goal is to design the most expensive hardware possible," and they would sell this into the film industry, right?
Yeah.
And Microsoft was starting to develop Direct 3D, and it was they even licensed OpenGL. And so my team was doing the versions of OpenGL that we would then give to Microsoft to run on Windows. Um, but at one point, there was a lawsuit between NVIDIA and SGI.
Hmm.
NVIDIA had copied or they'd infringed on a patent, and
Hmm.
SGI actually assigned me to go through all of the NVIDIA specs and go through all the SGI patents and say, oh, they're violating this one, they're not violating this one.
This is
And
99.
so, probably
Oh.
1999. And I found a bunch of evidence that, of course, was given to the lawyers, and the lawyers had NVIDIA dead to rights. They could have shut NVIDIA down, said, you're violating our frame buffer patents or something like that. But instead, SGI decided to divorce itself from the graphics industry, and they ended up um, having a deal where they sold the graphics technology and maybe 150, 200 engineers to NVIDIA, and
Hmm.
NVIDIA became the consumer graphics spin-off, and then SGI kind of withered after that.
Yeah.
But it was and I remember talking to one of the SGI engineers who was talking about shaders and how shaders, instead of just being, do a color lookup when you're drawing the triangle, it's you actually have a general purpose processor that could be used for video compression. And it was all a matter of like how many CPU cycle or GPU cycles, how many opcodes could you run before drawing the next pixel? And so, I can't give you a full history of that evolution of shader processing languages,
Hmm.
but at this point, a GPU shader can run just about any code, right?
Yeah.
In
And so
parallel.
so you actually worked with Microsoft on the Fahrenheit side of the picture by 99. That's really, what year did you join
Right.
SGI?
FTI was April 99, and I was put in charge of the low level API and
Uh,
eventually later also OpenGL. And so we had
oh, you're kidding me.
engineers
I didn't
on
know
SGI
this.
side. Yeah, we had engineers on SGI side that said, "This is what we want the interface, the display buffer interface, or um, the list of commands to look like." And Microsoft said, "No, no, it should look like this." And it had a lot to do with uh, like the rotation or the way that you would define the vertices in a buffer that the software would hand to the hardware.
Yeah.
And Microsoft was insistent, no, it has to be this way. And SGI said, no, it has to be this way. But both companies were basically fighting to get their way to have
Hmm.
an advantage for the standard. SGI wanted it optimized for OpenGL.
Hmm.
Microsoft wanted it optimized for DirectX. And
Hmm.
eventually, um, one of the members of my team who was doing the negotiation just said, "This isn't working. We're not going to do this." But um, the at the higher level, my SGI was going to ship Windows graphics development systems. But talking to you, I've come to realize that Microsoft was really just trying to um, keep things slow so that SGI couldn't enter the PC consumer graphics space. And eventually, SGI tried to do it on a Linux workstation
Hmm.
uh, for the PC, but um, people would buy the Linux versions of the systems because they were cheaper. They didn't have to pay for an OS,
Yeah,
and then they'd install Windows on the same hardware.
yeah,
And it was using NVIDIA hardware at that time. So
yeah. That's right. Oh God, I remember that's been so long. Do you remember the Talisman chip?
I remember the Talisman discussion that I remember talking to the team, and they had a lot of 3D graphics ideas that you would tell me about. Hey, we're thinking about this sort of thing. We'd get a presentation, and then I would take all that information and I would refer it to my boss. Uh, uh, anisotropic filtering was a really
Hmm.
good idea that came from that group.
Right.
I remember talking to Abrash about his visions for things, but
Yeah.
um, uh, it seemed that Microsoft was also playing the role of hardware companies would come and say, "We've got this new hardware design. It's going to do this, this, and this in hardware," and Microsoft would take that and say, and now talk to another company and say, "We think the future is anisotropic filtering. What do you guys
Hmm.
think about that?" So it was a way of pollinating graphics ideas, first explained to Microsoft and then vectored back to the hardware community. Do you think that
Yeah.
happened?
What I know it's interesting hearing your experience. I forgot. I knew it. I just forgot about your SGI tour with Fahrenheit. It's quite ironic now. The whole Talisman story. But remember, Talisman was Microsoft was going to make a 3D chip, and it would kill all of you. It's just they were going to be Nvidia. That was the plan, and they had all the luminaries from the 3D industry designing that chip. But the thing turned out to be too expensive and too slow. By the time Direct 3D had taken off in 1996, ATI and NVIDIA and Renderware and all these guys were running off with better, cheaper, more successful consumer hardware well ahead of what Microsoft was planning on shipping in Talisman by the time they could get to market. And so what Microsoft took what was the DirectX team and the OpenGL team and the Talisman team and put them under one group led by Jay Torborg. So that what Torborg and Microsoft were promoting was called Direct 3D, but what they were really pushing for was a Talisman optimized chip because they were planning on killing all chips back then. And when it was clear that Talisman wasn't going to be competitive with what Direct 3D had unleashed and ATI and NVIDIA were then producing, they gave up on it and said, well, we try to salvage some of our ideas by licensing pieces of Talisman, like ideas like anisotropic filtering, so they could go back to Bill Gates and Nathan Myhrvold and say, look, the industry is adopting Talisman. We're not going to make a chip that everybody uses. We're just going to chop up the ideas we invented and get them incorporated and everything. So that anisotropic filtering was something that they pressured the graphics chip companies hard to adopt so they could sort of claim or salvage a Talisman win. And Fahrenheit, because you may remember, it sounds like you were out of the picture by the time the OpenGL versus Direct 3D wars really broke out at Microsoft. But a thing that nobody publicly knew, but because you were close to Microsoft, I wonder how it sounds like you weren't aware. Microsoft had a secret deal with SGI in 1995. That's why Microsoft had acquired Softimage. Is that SGI said, "Yep, we can't keep investing in our own Unix OS. We want to move to Windows NT." But we are so popular and so known for this, we don't want to kill our own product the entire time we're partnered with Microsoft to migrate to Windows NT. So Microsoft acquired their OpenGL license and Softimage much earlier than when they announced the deal with SGI, which came years later in 1997 or 98. So Microsoft had essentially acquired OpenGL and was really defining the standard from that point of view, even though it wasn't really publicly known that SGI had kind of sold out to Microsoft much earlier and were keeping it a secret because they didn't want to cannibalize their sales. So years later in 98, people inversed the story and went, oh, SGI got out of the graphics business, and OpenGL just they nobly donated to the world as a standard, when really Microsoft had kind of been pulling the strings on it the whole time. So why was SGI collaborating closely with Microsoft on Fahrenheit in 1999? It was because of a 1995 deal that was just announced a year earlier. And so that's one of the things I couldn't talk about at the time, but these days I can go, the deal that was announced with SGI in 98 by Microsoft had taken place years earlier. Why did Microsoft acquire Softimage and then sell it later? It was to get the Talisman team. They were going to make Windows NT to replace Unix. They wanted to take over CAD, and Movie Graphics was which SGI owned. Paul Maritz had done a deal with SGI, and SGI had done that deal and given Microsoft the OpenGL license years earlier. And the two companies were collaborating to replace Unix with Windows NT, and had been for years. But that wasn't so. The whole OpenGL versus DirectX nonsense had a whole other meaning in the public world, because at that time I couldn't say we're both of those standards. Actually, we just can't admit it because we kind of uh, SGI bent the knee years ago, but it's a secret. So that was the weird thing about that era, and so now I'm wondering how much you knew had about that had taken place, because you were around us a lot. But even I wasn't that aware of the SGI deal back then.
Well, I remember that we were obligated at SGI to update newer versions of OpenGL for Windows.
Hmm.
OpenGL was shipped, and the uh, SGI had done something really clever. There's something in OpenGL and in graphics hardware where you have to set up the hardware context,
Yeah.
and then the GPU has to read, or the software has to read the context and then draw everything according to the context as it's currently set.
Right.
Well, what the SGI implementation of OpenGL did would it would generate code
Mhm.
on the fly based on the current context. So it
Right.
didn't have to do if then else the whole time. And that was
Right.
something I guess Microsoft couldn't figure out how to do. Couldn't see how we were doing it. And so that's why they licensed this software implementation. So I managed a team, partly Intel, some team in Russia was helping optimize part of it, and
Mm.
had a local game developers now at AMD who specialized in optimizing it. But
Oh, funny.
NVIDIA was always pushing on having, we need new features in OpenGL, because for a long time, OpenGL was just as viable as a game graphics API
Yeah.
as DirectX, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What
Now
happened to
they think both
OpenGL,
are being
Ken?
replaced. Well, it's still got a foothold in Linux and the science community, but I think everything's going to be replaced by Vulkan.
Yeah. I mean, DirectX 12 is basically Vulkan. Um, but so all your DirectX 12 is basically a Vulkan architecture. And yeah, that's what the OpenGL guys haven't updated OpenGL in several years now. So, and I think they've said yes, Vulkan is the future, which I think was an API defined by AMD, if I'm not mistaken. I think
I'm not sure
AMD
about
did
that. I
the.
know it's under the Kronos
I
working
know it
group,
is
but
now.
maybe
It's
somebody.
the thing with these standards bodies is there's always a company with a lot of money marionetting them. So it's like, yes, it's an open standard controlled by us. And as I recall, it was Greg Stone at AMD who made Vulkan and helped cause that to be an open standard.
I'll have
Um,
to
Stoner,
search
Greg
that, but
Stoner.
I know Greg Stoner.
Yeah.
Um,
Stone. It's either Stone or
yeah,
Stoner. I think it was Stoner. Very brilliant guy, very eccentric, but he was kind of the big mind at AMD years later for competing with Nvidia with AMD's APIs and drivers and things. Right?
one of the big benefits to OpenGL in the early years versus DirectX is that DirectX did not hold your hand if the hardware didn't support a feature that you were trying to use. And some
Yeah.
years later, Direct 3D said, okay, well, if someone tries to use a graphics API feature that the hardware can't support, we'll go ahead and emulate it in software. Huge undertaking, and I don't know how Microsoft pulled that off, but it was a key to kind of unseating OpenGL as a standard.
Yeah, it actually came with RenderMorphics. So the RenderMorphics, well, when we acquired it's interesting how the funny thing about the history of GPUs and DirectX is that it was just us doing it as the skunkworks. It wasn't a corporate project, wasn't funded. So there were very few witnesses around who know where any of it came from. We're it, Ken. And so I hear all kinds of crazy apocryphal stories that are kind of invented by PR people that aren't the truth because they just weren't, they don't know where it originated. So RenderMorphics originally we acquired them because they had a whole retain mode API that specified lighting transformation and rendering. And Kate Seekings and uh, um, uh, sorry, pardon me, it's Servan, excuse me, it was foreign Servan, who was the kind of British, uh, you know um, John Carmack of RenderMorphics graphics had designed this entire software emulated API, which was incredibly fast, to be hardware accelerated. That's why we acquired them, is that he had a whole driver model. So the very first release of Direct 3D under the DirectX 2 CD at the Pax Romana party that I was wearing that toga at, that Roman Emperor thing, had the Direct 3D driver with retain mode emulation for an entire hardware driver stack. The dock's actually on the CD. And so it specified hardware acceleration of rendering, lighting, and transform in the first Direct 3D driver APIs. And a lot of our early relationship after you had left ATI with NVIDIA and Jensen was Jensen had a Sega deal and was coming to us with their quad based kind of Sega architecture. And we said, no, we're not going to support that. We don't care if you're Sega. And Jensen came on to Microsoft fairly strong initially, and we said, no, we're not going to do it. It's very proprietary. We're trying to make something that a whole industry can compete at. So no, go away. And Sega, their relationship with Sega fell apart because Sega was falling apart, and they ran low on money. And Nvidia came back and said, okay, we want to be join the Direct 3D family. What do we have to do? And we said, here is our driver standard for accelerating lighting, transformation, and shading. We want you to accelerate that pipeline. And so Jensen went away and said, okay, that's what we're going to do. And and so NVIDIA became very zealous DirectX supporters, which included being very zealous because the funny thing was um, Jensen had learned from you because he's like, crap, ATI has a cuddly freaking relationship with Microsoft, and those guys are out promoting ATI chips all the time, and they just shunned us, and our products are failing. We want that treatment. So he came and said, what do we have to do to get the Ken Nicholson treatment you guys give ATI? And you were gone, so you don't know this, I think. um, and we said, well, you got to accelerate the entire Direct 3D pipeline. We want all of that accelerated. And so he said, okay, I'll go away and do that. And so ATI dedicated itself to accelerating the entire generalized architecture. But ATI was in there with us first and in with Direct 3D making the decelerators. So we didn't take them too seriously for quite a bit as they were figuring it out. And that's the thing, is I don't remember the exact transition point where suddenly ATI kind of lit up and we're also right in there in the battle with NVIDIA for making GPUs. So today, Jensen and NVIDIA's PR department is excellent at taking credit for introducing the GPU. But when I go back through my timeline, I go, I'm pretty sure ATI was right in there around the same time, working with us on accelerating the same stuff. But I'm not sure if it sounds like you were out of there by that point in time, so you may not remember any of that.
Right. I think that uh, the transfer of all of that, all of the licensing of patents for graphics and transferring all of those SGI graphics engineers to NVIDIA, it
Yep.
changed the complexion of NVIDIA entirely. And
Yeah. That's
that's where a
right.
lot of these leading edge ideas came from. And I think it would be appropriate to mention that Jensen's kind of software mastermind from those days, a guy named Dwight Juris,
Yeah.
who's been a VP at that company forever. He
Isn't he the
understood the
CTO
graphics
still?
technology.
Yeah.
I think he may be, yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, Jensen was great at attracting great minds and keeping them, and he recognized the gold mine with the people that he got from SGI back then. And
Interesting.
so the GPU ideas, the general purpose GPU ideas, were all coming out of these researchers that were at SGI and had worked on OpenGL, bringing
Interesting.
those ideas as new extensions to DirectX and new extensions to OpenGL.
Interesting. Yeah, very cool. What year did you leave SGI?
I wasn't there very long. I was there till July 2000. So yeah,
Yeah, just right on the thing. You got your fingers on the Xbox era, just the edge, that
right.
lip. Well, yeah, very strange. Well, you've been very generous with your time, and I don't want to. I'm having a good time. We should do this some more. A couple things. If you have any other good stories you wanted to share that I neglected, or good swag to show, let's do that. And I'd love to hear what you're doing these days too, if you have a minute.
That sounds great. Love to do that. Yeah. Anybody who's stuck with us for this extremely long conversation, we appreciate your interest
Yeah,
in
I'll chop it into two
our glory
episodes.
days.
Old guys
Okay.
reminiscing like
All
we
right.
did at the GDC 30 years later, Ken. That's how long it's been.
I know. I know.
All
I
right.
think I'm going to take all the old T-shirts and swag and your costumes. I'm put it all in a sealed box, not to be opened until you start your museum.
You should do that. I would love to. I want to get. We should. It's the 30. You're 30. Maybe the good year to do a museum. Phil Taylor has a huge collection of amazing stuff. Eric Ingstrom, rest in peace, has had a garage full of amazing things. And then Jason Robar, who was the first evangelist working with the game industry after I hired him into that job. They have amazing collections. So I'd love to go, hey, while we're still alive and kicking, we should enjoy our stuff, but it'd be really fun to gather it and all in some place one day. So people will remember that there was a time in history that is selectively forgotten because maybe not all the stories are as glamorous as we'd like them to be in modern terms. But when we made Microsoft a game company and created the modern market for GPUs, that was a really exciting time. And now, so I'm working on, I'm back and backwards. I'm working on video technology because that's the cutting edge. But working on the sexy VR stuff, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. We're working on
Mm.
augmented reality because
Oh,
I worked at Magic Leap for a while, and that was really cool. I realized
wow, right.
VR isn't as cool as augmented reality, and
I love
um,
ragging on Magic Leap.
it was cool at the time. It was cool to when you put on the glasses and you see 3D graphics actually integrated with the environment. It's pretty cool, but um, we need kind of Meta's Project Orion,
Yeah.
the optical pass through rather than digital pass through. The
Hmm.
Quest just doesn't give you that. And the ability to place holograms in your environment. And we've gone into that in detail. I don't know if we have time in this call to discuss all of that, but
I can chop it into
one of
two
the things I
segments. It's okay if you want to talk about
okay,
it.
sure. One of the things that I wonder though about all of that history is if you and I, or I mean, we were pushing, trying to make things happen,
Yeah.
but would it all have happened if we weren't pushing? Would just
Yeah.
some other guys from different companies that would have said, well, we obviously have to establish these standards, or
Windows and
maybe it would have been
Microsoft.
on
Yeah.
another platform.
Yeah. It would, I think Windows and Microsoft never would have become a game platform. And there never would have been GPUs as a consequence because Microsoft didn't institutionally care about any of that except uh, maybe movies and CAD. And so if you just, I wonder, you think the same thing, right? And I go, well, what would really have happened if we hadn't done it? and you couldn't remember the thing we did was make a new OS that infected Windows through driver architecture. If you had actually done a Microsoft thing and said, "Well, let's architect Windows to play games," it would have taken a decade to fix because GDI, as you pointed out, was so bad, right? So, how long do you think it would have taken Bill Gates and the Microsoft multimedia team to go, "Hey, let's do gaming"? What do you think?
Well, it might have happened at Apple or Sony
Right?
and Fujitsu. Fujitsu had the Towns PC that they were trying to promote as a game system. So everybody was trying to figure out, how do we go from console video game graphics? How do we
Yep.
bring this into consumers' hands? And
Yep.
it might be a completely different world. We all might be on
Yeah.
Sega OS or Nintendo OS
Yeah.
PCs at this point or something.
I think it would be a PlayStation, Nintendo console game world today. And I think that the PC game world would have died because if you think about it, shockingly, remember after Apple was in shambles at the time of DirectX, right? They had the DOJ trial. Steve Jobs just returned. Apple's market share had collapsed. So, interestingly, if you look at the timeline to the moment when Apple got into gaming was never on the Mac. It was with the iPhone. And today, they're bigger than Xbox. Apple makes more money in games than Xbox does. $100 billion a year, something like that, in mobile games. So, so what you would observe is that Microsoft never would have done it. If you assume Microsoft would have stayed a monopoly, then I think the PC game world as we know it would have died. Maybe there would have been checkers and hearts and crappy online games, but there would be no Xbox. There'd be no American game console revolution. It would have all stayed, I think, on in the console world out of Japan, um, flat out. And then the mobile era would have happened. So we would be living in a console and mobile gaming world today. And I don't think the intervening PC stuff ever would have happened. Even if, remember Gabe Newell's ex Microsoft leaves and founds Valve, but he never would have been able to do that on Windows without it being fixed. And he never would have been introduced to John Carmack to license the Half Life engine if I hadn't introduced him. And he never would have made
Oh.
Steam if I hadn't showed him how to do it at Wild Tangent because he got in a lawsuit with Sierra and wanted to know how to escape the clutches of publishers. So I talked him into online publishing of games. So I don't think you'd have a Valve, you wouldn't have an Xbox. I don't think Microsoft would ever have really gotten into gaming because they had so much. If you were there, it would have been Julia Child's Wine Guide and Microsoft Multimedia for at least a decade. Because you saw what we did, what the kind of havoc we had to create to do what we did, which included up to and including getting fired for causing mayhem. Because sans that, I don't think it would have happened. And how in Microsoft there was a DOJ trial. Who was going to get by Windows with anything after that, right? So I have trouble. I don't think that the gaming world on the PC would have happened. Um,
Interesting. You basically had to sacrifice yourselves in order to make this to happen by pushing and pushing and pushing until things broke.
it
And
wasn't that
I, you
much
know,
of a
I think
sacrifice, but yes, it was. There was a lot of sacrifice involved. But boy, am I glad we did it.
um, at the Game Developers Conference where we touched base,
Yeah,
we met each other just, last month, and you and I don't know what your take was, but this might be the end of the PC gaming area for this cycle because it looks like everything's moving toward mobile right now, and
yeah.
Qualcomm's going to be dictating the future of graphics. What do you think about that?
I think you have a point. Um, well, I did an episode just preceding this one on what I thought of the GDC, and I just did one you haven't seen yet, in part reacting to what I saw at the GDC, which is what I call the tragic kind of enshittification of both the PC and the mobile game market. The So you've got this weird phenomena where it's just the mobile market's saturated with crap games. And so at the same time, you'd go, yes, logically, you should be correct. logically, anybody doing a good job at Apple and Google should absolutely own the future of the game business. But man, have they gone, we're just going to let our stores get swamped with essentially scammy malware, toxic content for children. We're going to milk it for 100% margin, and we're going to let the real companies trying to make quality game content go out of business because it's so profitable to just have so many random shit games getting thrown in their heap. And they let that happen. And Valve, to a certain extent, less so, but still has indulged in that as well. And so I found it shocking to go to the GDC and see it so barren of real game companies. And so the vibe I'm getting is that you should be right, that this should be a major renaissance in PC gaming. I think the console business doesn't work, and it's dying fast, except as it exists. The interesting thing is to me is that Sony Nintendo has always gotten it. They've stayed the kid-friendly, family-friendly, you can trust us platform for decades, and they just keep thriving. And I think Sony got the memo from Nintendo. So when I see the Sony Play 5 with the Astrobot experience and I hand that to my 5-year-old daughter, it's fantastic. I go, wow, the Japanese get it. They deserve to get it. And the Xbox experience has been enshittified, and Microsoft has commodified with their real pass the games. So the going, hey, we're going to just charge one pass for all your games, essentially, is the same trend that's gone on mobile, which is the flooding it with cheap content because nobody can get served. It's not a curated quality marketplace. And as a consequence, you get this kind of crushing collapse in content. And you may remember from the Atari days that that's one of the reasons that Atari failed. And years later, Nintendo succeeded in the console business, is that Atari allowed the market, anybody could make an Atari cartridge. And so retail flooded with shit games, just tons of them, until consumers lost confidence in them. And then the console business died for years until Nintendo introduced the NES and created highly religiously curated marketplaces to ensure that even though the Nintendo had only a fewer games for it, they were always very high quality. And that gave them this incredible longevity in the market. So I think empirically, you should be correct. Technically, the console market should die. The PC, the mobile, and I think, ironically, the PC market should thrive. But owing to weird economic factors, I don't think it'll obviously be the case. Um, and what I saw at the GDC was was the absence of the substance of the game industry and just lots of little players struggling. Did you notice that? I didn't see. Where was the Microsoft Xbox booth? Where was the giant Nvidia booth? Nvidia had a competing conference overlapping down the road for all the Nvidia developers. They didn't give a shit about the GDC. That's the first time Nvidia's ever done that. Just run the GDC over. Gone, fuck it. Irrelevant. So technically, yes, it should be the mobile gaming era. Totally. Ironically, I think it should also still be a PC gaming era, for a different reason. And I would have thought it would be the death of the console era because the digital era is here and the retail Walmart era of shelf space is gone, and yet the best console experiences are still the Japanese retail consoles, the best gaming experiences you can actually trust. The only device I can't hand my cell phone to my kids to play on. It's a toxic, malicious, sneaky rip-off experience. I give them a Switch all day long. It shouldn't be that way. So I just did an episode on my outrage at that because I would say the engineer and the gamer in me wants to agree with you. The businessman in me says that's not actually the way it's going.
Well, I think you're right about the Nintendo appeal. A lot of it has a wider audience appeal than with consoles or with the Nintendo Switch. We're about to hear about the Nintendo Switch 2, I think, in the coming
Yeah.
week or so. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see that. So that maybe will be a big seller. Big seller.
Yeah.
Um, but the the 5090, which is the Apex, is what, a $3,500 graphics card,
Yeah.
right? That's what are
That
being
doesn't
sold. It's like
exist.
supposed to be 2,000,
Yeah.
right? And it's so expensive to stay current, and a lot of the advances that are being done in PC graphics now are software based
Yeah.
advances, right?
Yeah.
The DLSS. And so we may be just kind of reaching barriers of like what's possible. In fact, I have a weekly call with someone in the other camp, the not the non NVIDIA graphics card company,
Yeah.
and they're looking at the add-in board market and saying, "Wow, it's an okay business, but AI is where the real money is, and that's where they're selling, innovative new hardware."
Yeah.
That 5090 is 1,000 watts. It's a kilowatt card, and we're from the era of remembering incandescent 100-watt light bulbs, right? And those things get really hot. Imagine
Yeah.
10 of those compressed into the
Yeah.
size of a little chip.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of power. Now, meanwhile, Qualcomm with its graphics chips, it's able to look at the advances of AMD and NVIDIA and say, oh, I see what you're doing with DirectX 12 shaders. We can
Mhm.
do that too.
Yeah.
And they have fewer shaders, but it's just on their roadmap, right? It's like, well, let's just keep catching up to where the high end graphics manufacturers are with every new
Yeah.
generation. A generation might take 4 years, but eventually Qualcomm, being the low power mobile version of a GPU, catches up with software and hardware features. So to the point where you buy $1,000 phone and it can do pretty much anything that your
Yeah.
your desktop with a
Yeah. There's no
16 gigs of memory can do.
if I were working for Apple, I'd tear that place apart in gaming because they're missing so much opportunity in that space. That your phone should have been your game console replacement a decade ago. Should have happened.
And iPad.
Yeah, your iPad. It's amazing. So another way to put it, Ken, you're saying what happened if we didn't happen at Microsoft? There would have been no Windows PC gaming revolution. Would not have happened. And the inverse is if I'd been at Apple a decade ago, your phone would have killed the console business a long time ago because it should have. And the fact that it doesn't is what makes me cranky and cynical because I go, you're right. Of course, a bunch of business people at Qualcomm will get, let's make a better mobile device. But that's nothing like the acumen to make it a game business. And it's nothing like the problem with gaming is it's an entertainment business and cold accountants and lawyers can't think about it right. They're physically incapable of making entertainment platforms on their own. And so getting the look at the one of the most fascinating case studies of this kind of catastrophe is I gotta be careful who I name because I like working with a lot of these companies. But the failure of Stadia, right? My, it was such a weird thing. It was such an exciting thing for Google to jump on. You go, yes, go for it, Google. Cloud gaming, hell yeah. Do it now. Should have, there was failed attempts at it, and they should have been failed earlier. But we're in the era where it's possible just to go deliver the game as a stream. I don't need 1,000 watts. I don't need a kilowatt GPU next to me to play a great game anymore. I have infinite bandwidth flowing into my house. Um, and so saying, I need this giant computer, I agree with you. We should have put it in the cloud. The problem is the cloud's actually more expensive than the computer is next to you. So it's not cheap. There's no scale advantage to putting in the cloud. And weirdly, Google, the advertising company, the company that's all of its business models are justified on creating and controlling ad impressions, says we're going to make a paid cloud gaming service then discover that nobody needs a gaming service that's just as inaccessible unless you pay for it as buying a game console. And so they put this huge amount of money into a dumb alien business model for Google, and like the second they launch it and it fails, they give up, gone. And even that much vision and initiative was pretty bold. So the idea that there'll be bold gaming initiatives from fun people who know how to make entertainment platforms seems to be very, very scarce and hard to see happening. And so you have to assume that the disruptive phenomena is in gaming is the exception in that sense, not the rule. I do anyway. And so that's where I go, yes, of course the mobile phone, it should have happened ages ago. Consoles should have been dead ages ago. Mobile devices should rule all of gaming ages ago. You know, technical improvements to that argument seem to bear little association with business clue about how to become a game platform or entertainment platform, how to monetize it. I mean, the whole Xbox thing is really weird to watch from the outside. Uh, for me because the the cannibalization of their content business, right? Going, let's throw everything into subscription, shut down all our studios, flood it with indie content, which sounds noble, sounds very noble. But when you flood a platform with indie content, it turns into scamware and shitty content because they consume each other down to the lowest common minimum denominator of a game that gets a day one launch impression and that's it. And just like happened on Apple and is kind of happening in Steam. So Xbox embracing that just makes me go, oh, I can't, I don't have faith in this trend. Um,
Well, it's interesting. You talked about. I was kind of laughing when you said, if you'd gone into micro or Apple and you would have like oriented toward them games, you would have changed things around. But
oh
I
yeah.
was laughing because you would last about a day or
Oh,
two
of
at
course.
Apple
Oh
before
yeah.
you're too much of a free thinker and analyst. And at Apple, they pride
Too close
themselves
to Steve
in
Jobs
thinking.
and Philly. Yeah.
Yeah, but think different is kind of ironic as their motto because
I know.
they didn't look at DirectX and say, okay, we need our own. And they could have followed like the next year with their own DirectX, but
Yeah.
it's been years. They have Metal now. I don't know too much about that
Yeah.
API, but finally they've gotten to the point
It's
where they,
Vulcanish.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were promoting OpenGL for some time. But um, you were talking about Stadia and its failure, and I think everybody that I talked to, all the people I knew in the game industry, said, "Well, how is this going to solve the latency problem?" Right? When you're playing a fast action game, you did a whole talk on latency isn't an
Yeah.
issue
It's an
online, but it
imaginary
is.
problem.
You know, well, yeah, I would disagree because I think that's what killed Stadia, right? And they have ways of with Microsoft's uh, game. They have their own. You can play games online or play them on the console, right?
Yeah.
If you go to Xbox, and if you say, "Oh, I want to play it online rather than installing it," then for 15 seconds you look up. We're trying to find a server for you, and
What's the
after 15
difference?
seconds, it's like, "Well, we're trying to
Yeah.
find another server for you," and then
Yeah.
you play it, and it's like it doesn't feel the same as having it locally rendered.
Right. But
And
what's the
and
difference
I do
between the
think that
latency? Does League of Legends have a latency problem?
I don't know. I don't play
Mhm.
League of Legends, but I play Call of
Mm-mm.
Duty. So
Right. Does Call of Duty
it,
have a
that
latency problem?
there, people don't really realize what's going with the latency problem. But like, I
Right.
shot that guy, and then it says, no, no, he shot you first. Well, I didn't see that. That didn't really
Uh-huh.
happen.
Yeah.
And people just get mad. There's this guy, Doctor Disrespect, and he
Yeah.
gets so mad when he snipes somebody, but it turns
Mhm.
out he was killed. And
Right.
I think this they're lying to you. You see something, and then the game server tells you, no, that didn't really happen.
Yeah.
Something
Of
else happened.
course. Does
That's the
Fortnite have a
latency problem.
latency problem?
I imagine it has the same problem.
It's making billions
It
of dollars. It's
rewinds
the most
time and tells you
successful game
something
in
else.
history. Well, what a point I'm trying to make is that all multiplayer games that make billions and billions of dollars and are wildly successful obey the same latency physics over the internet as video does. The difference is the game knows the latency and designs the latency into the game so that you don't experience it, and then it's worth billions and is just fine. And people might say I've got a latency problem, but Their their money says different. Not stopping them from burning billions. Whereas when you take a game and stream it as video, without the game being designed for it, doesn't know about the latency, then the game has a noticeable latency problem. So the internet and the speed of light is no different from any online multiplayer MMO that's wildly successful. And from a streamed game, the only difference is the game is aware of the latency and designs it into the game. And for streamed games, all of them that are not aware of the latency just gets tacked on in front of the game. And so you always feel it. All you have to do to stream a game with no latency problem at all, from the point of view of making MMOs, is to build games that know about the latency that's included in streaming. And then they won't have it either. So the latency problem people talk about in video, from my point of view, is technical ignorance about where the problem really is, which is there is no latency from a business problem. From a business point of view, there's no latency problem at all in gaming for games that know about their latency. Anytime you stream a game without it being aware of its latency, people complain there's a latency problem, and that's solved with engineering. There's no problem with the speed of light, no problem with the diameter of Earth, no problem with our network infrastructure, just a problem with the gaming business model, in my view. So I think that's easily overcome compared to other engineering problems we often face.
I think you're correct. I mean, you can give a compelling gaming experience, and as long as people don't get too mad about the game rewinding time and telling you something didn't different happen than you just saw, then I think that, if they're making money, who can argue with that, right? But what we're dealing with light latency and cloud rendering right now is, let's say you have a computer rendered character that you're having a conversation with, and it's
Yep.
driven by AI. And we saw some demonstrations of this at GDC. And uh, the typical implementation of an animating character responding with um, an LLM based uh, conversational, AI chatbot is that it takes about 5 to 6 seconds for your prompt to be entered, for it to be converted to text, processed by the LLM, converted back, and doing the whole cycle of animating the character. And it looks, 6 seconds delay with all of those steps in between.
Yeah.
It's impossible. People won't tolerate that. And
Yep.
you and I, if I ask you a question, if you don't answer within like a second or two, then it's not a conversation anymore. There's too much delay, right? So latency does
Right, Ken.
matter in terms of people people they're the uncanny valley of a realistic experience like that
Hmm.
gets magnified when the character that you're speaking with can't respond at human speeds, right?
Yeah.
Human detectable speeds.
Yeah, but the funny thing is when I hear you say you and I suffer from a related condition, which is we're platform engineers first and game designers fifth, right? And so a game is just an illusion. It has no productive purpose. It's not reality. It's there to waste your time for money. And so great game design is just it's a magic trick. Look, I pulled a coin out of my butt. It wasn't really there, Ken. Didn't have to be. It was just an illusion. So the people who make great games can easily overcome some of the obstacles you're talking about with clever game design. And you go, of course, we engineers will come along and we'll get the LLM real time. That'll just give us a minute. We'll take care of that, Ken. You and I will go pioneer that as usual. But in the interim, what you're describing is solvable, right? Just pardon me for being this way, but the most of the conversations people are having in games are stupider than shit. I don't need fricking DeepSeek and $100 million supercomputer to have a bunch of teenagers swearing at each other while they're playing. I think I can generate that bullshit in a fraction of a second with an LLM that'll run on an ARM processor, and everybody will be 100% convinced because nobody's discussing the standard model of physics with the damn thing. So when I see that stuff, I go, yeah, you just hit that with a little fantasy paintbrush and it'll cover it for a while. And there's some, I think what's happening, and it's exciting. I love mysteries because I'm used to knowing everything years in advance of everybody else, or so I tell people. But I think what's happening is we are seeing the AI trend. Games, the uncanny valley you're talking about, the tools and the way we produce games, we've hit a peak. We have the the way we build games requires so much energy, so much manual fiddling, so much coordination to achieve a diminishing return in realism that it doesn't work anymore. And that we're facing the collapse of the model of authoring what we call a game. And then on the other side of it are just Ken's game generated by an LLM streamed to him as video. 10 years from now, it'll just be, I feel like playing, give me the best thing with Diablo, except I want it to look like a movie or I want it to look like anime and I want it to have these characters and put Dr. Seuss in it too, because that sounds fun. And the game will just go, there you go. And it'll be an individual game for all of us. 10 years from now, I think that's the game market we'll be in. And the path we get there is going to be really an exciting ride. But I think that's because we can't make those high production value games cost effectively any better without an uncanny valley. So I actually suspect that we're right on the cusp of kind of a that's not even remotely how we make a game anymore. Everything you and I know about making games technically is about to become irrelevant and be replaced by AI guys in the next decade, is my suspicion. Um,
Well, where is all of this compute going to happen that generates these games? It's not going to be on your
yeah,
phone. It's
yeah,
not going to be on your PC. It's going to be in the cloud, right?
yeah,
Cloud resources can be as they can scale up to whatever size is necessary.
yeah. And they'll have no latency problem at all. They'll have negative latency. You know why, Ken? The cloud will
They'll
guess
predict
what you're
what you're
going
going
to
to
do.
say.
Yes. Yes. I love talking to another smart guy. Uh,
Well, I think that could
wait,
happen if
that was
they say, well,
priceless.
here
Uh,
they model what a typical human is going to say,
yeah,
and they say, well, if they say that, then I've already got a computed answer
yeah,
for that, and
yeah,
among thousands of them that I can
yeah.
respond.
You don't get it. It's the 6 seconds that the computer's taking to generate the answer to your question. It'll take an hour, but it'll do it yesterday, and then it'll be real time. Ken, that's what's happening, right? Exactly what you just did. The computer
Well,
will just go and yeah,
what happens if I switch languages in the middle of the conversation and start talking about purple rhinoceroses? You're going to be able to generate a pause. It's like, oh, I didn't expect that one, right? So if you stay within certain guidelines,
yeah.
you'll get real time
Yeah,
responses. But if you
you and
go
I,
beyond,
we're not the freaking customer, Ken. We're the smartest guys we know, and we're gonna be the ones going, I can break this bitch. My idea of a fun game is seeing if I can get it to crash, right? And see if I can get it to error. But the vast majority of people who enjoy being immersed in the fantasy experience, they're gonna be fooled like that. They're trying to be fooled. They're eager. Shitty tech will fool them. It'll be like the Donkey Kong 1976 of AI is going to be the best fucking gaming experience, and the vast majority of people will be thrilled with that, and you and I will sneer because they're not for us. And yes, when I try to bring up quantum mechanics with it, it'll fail, and we'll go still smarter. What a dumb product! But there'll be a world full of children just going, "I'm talking to my new best friend." All day long. Where's mom's money? That's what's going to happen.
not only do you understand quantum physics, but you've started several successful companies, Myriad, Wild Tangent. You were a successful evangelist at Microsoft. You've got your new company, Playcast. So your your expertise goes beyond just game engineering, game technology, but it's into marketing and business. And what I enjoy having conversations is like I say, see the future looks like this, and then you say with your business hat or your marketing hat, it's like no, this is more likely to happen because these other forces that you're not considering
I
are
want to
going to
agree
make
with
the
you on the
difference.
things, right? Because I'm a huge nerd too, right? Because I know you love the VR thing, right? It's a big future, and I just go,
XR, mixed
yeah.
reality, augmented reality, not VR, not
And
VR.
even worse, Ken.
No, you'll see. You'll see.
Ah,
We'll
mhm.
all be wearing glasses connected to our phones, connected to our watches, connected to the ring, connected to another compute box. We're going to be wearing a network of compute devices, and the display will be here,
Nothing
overlaying what
would
we're
bring
looking at.
me greater joy than losing an argument to you on that point, Ken. But unfortunately, it's not going to happen this time.
It's going to take a while, but that's the way things are going. You'll see. You'll see.
I
I have a
wonder.
crystal ball right over here. You can't see it.
All right. Well, I've got a crystal ball, and you can see it. Uh, yeah, but this thing's probably damaging my mind as I sit next to it night after night. Well, I really
Oh,
appreciate you taking the time. Did you? So before we go, did you have any other artifacts? Because you said you brought some things. I didn't want to preclude you from showing any other cool artifacts. Although I'm amazed you have
I
the
showed
Emperor's
them
Sword.
all.
That's
Yeah.
great. All right, good. Well, maybe next time we'll dig out some more. And I really appreciate you taking this time. It's really good catching up with you. It's been a wild ride over the years. I think the 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 exciting thing about the market condition around, I think you and I can agree, is that shit's melting right now. And the game industry has melted horribly before. And when it has, there's been a whole new era, a whole new thing. And so the thing I'm excited about is I think we're on the brink of one or more whole new things. But this well we have to go through is going to be a painful one for the industry, for the people who sort of all this growth that has happened. You hear people going, it's just dead, it's doomed, it's all over. And I go, what was is dead and doomed? People had to give up their horses to get cars, but I think that's coming. And I think that one, there's an AI revolution coming. And I think the AI revolution makes the latency thing, all even the semantic debate about hiding it, go away because the AI will just predict it before, and then it will be already there, just like you did a second ago, which was hilarious. Um,
When do we get to our cyberpunk 2077 future? When does all our
you
whole
want that?
existence get?
How old are you, Ken? Just roughly, we're the same age, right? We're in our 50s,
Yeah,
right?
I'm 65. Yeah.
So really, you're that much older than me? Good
Yeah.
grief! You've still got hair. You just all that healthy eating or something, man. Sailing in California, God. Um, yeah. So you're probably the last one who wants that world, other than you and Elon Musk, which puts you in good company, right? But I don't.
Yeah.
I think most people
Neuralink.
go, can I just, can I just get into a game, have a really good time, and not have it be difficult to get into and not involve wearing a lot of shit or buying a lot of hardware? That's kind of my suspicion that, once you're past my world revolves around games 12-year-old, which those who are great at making games stay at well into their career, just to be fair. Um, I don't think that's what anybody wants, other than us huge nerds. And there's
Well, I
only
was
like
working
five of
at
us.
General
Yeah.
Electrics on the like new media interface, and a lot of people went off to Meta when they kind of shut that group down. But we were working with Google Glass and some of those
Right.
uh,
That's right. You were
like
in their
the
R&D,
Connect.
weren't they?
That's right. And the there was a promotional thing they talked about the worker of the future who's going to have he's going to be like he's going to have superpowers that we would
Hmm.
consider superpowers today because he's got
Yeah.
the augmented reality glasses, and they did prototypes of like, well, how could you take a worker wearing these glasses and make them more productive? And maybe we'll all be replaced by robots and LLMs generating. But the idea that you could have an advantage over coworkers or other people by having some sort of augmented reality display connected to the cloud, I still believe in that vision. And I don't want to go into the cyberpunk fashion of the future, but I do believe it will be neat when your glasses will tell you who you're talking to when you meet someone, what their net worth is, what their social credit score is, and all sorts of dystopian ideas. But it can actually be helpful
That's
to have
it's good that you
some
recognize that
heads-up
about that
display.
exciting vision.
Exciting Vision. That's a great name for a company. Let's start a new
Exciting.
startup called Exciting Vision. And
uh, I don't know. I think you and I should, if you like that stuff, you just got to remember that every science fiction movie you ever reference, none of them have a happy ending. I want to start a company called Dystopia is what I want to do. I wonder if I can get dystopia.com, and that's where we'll all live in a in giant axolotl tanks, in suspended in fluid, living in a faulty reality. Because if reality was too convincing, we'd be unhappy and cease to power the giant machine AI that is our overlord. If I remember my metaverse plots, the
Well,
Matrix.
Elon Musk has started this company, Neuralink. I've
Yes.
applied multiple times because I think
Oh,
that,
I
you know,
hope
he
you get
says
in there.
that would be cool.
Yeah.
But I think that they're looking for people that know how to like put wires into brains and stuff like that right now. But
Just
the
stick
idea
them in there.
that you could have a computer directly wired and with like a display output to some vision center in your brain, you know, eventually they will solve the engineering problems of making that happen. And I think what um, Cyberpunk 2077, or you know, you hear about Michio Kaku, the
Yeah.
physicist, talking about eventually we'll have contact lenses that have a, you know, 4K or 8K
Yeah.
display built into them. These are extrapolations by physics of where this technology goes. And we see all of these changes that will, societal changes that will come about because of them. And we say, oh, that's a dystopian horror future. But you know, so are robot drones with machine guns mounted on them.
Those are
That's our
flying
current
all over
future.
now. Yeah.
Right.
Remember when
And
Aliens, the
uh,
movie, came out and the robot machine guns just standing there in the hallway gunning down was the coolest sci-fi idea ever, right? And now we're sitting there watching flocks of drones and bot ships taking out the Russian Navy, just like a bunch of guys on the
yeah,
battlefield going, "Let's glue together a drone and take out an entire oil plant somewhere near Moscow." You just
yeah,
it's a weird future we live in, isn't it?
it is. But you know, I think like if it's possible for technology to be done, it will be done by somebody.
Oh
And
yeah.
then we'll just have to cope with whatever the ramifications of that technology being developed are, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, Judgment Day, by the way, was that Terminator 2 movie, right? Then that's where you
Yes.
got the name for Judgment Day event.
That is true. It was a nuclear apocalypse themed movie, as you may recall. And
Right.
we liked our nuclear
And
apocalypse themed launch events.
I thought, you know, I think that the AR future is much more than you know, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, when you see what the Terminator bot is seeing, he looks at a person and does a scan of their body, it identifies weapons and threats and gives you
Mm.
all of these
There's
statistics.
text going
You know,
streaming down the screen that the Terminator's reading in his mind's eye or something. There's like a little console for the
yeah,
Terminator's brain to analyze. Yeah.
yeah. Well, you know, we're now getting cars that have a little heads-up display and on the dashboard that tells you your speed and what direction you'll need to turn coming up. And so the idea of text and visuals overlaid on your vision, you know, so you can pay attention to driving, but you can also have these helping
You're gonna
navigation
be
items
devil's
is
advocate, just the contrarian, because I sit in my basement and Amazon brings me shit. I can't think of a reason to ever drive a car anymore. So, one, not only do the cars drive themselves, but every reason I needed to go somewhere else, I don't have to visit you. I just hit Zoom and we're talking. Like this is the most we've talked in our entire lives together, Ken. And I just hit a button
that's
and
true.
boop. I didn't have to get on a fucking plane. Nobody had to sit on $1 billion flying building to get me to California with a team of people with dials and instruments. Not 1 million gallons of fuel didn't have to be burned to haul my ass down to California. I just went Zoom, and I'm sitting here with my fat ass in my leather chair with my favorite mug, and I didn't need any technology help at all to reach you other than Zoom. So when I just going, okay, but I don't know why I need to drive, and I don't know why I'm ever leaving my house to be exposed to danger, and I don't know why any dangerous people would ever leave their houses to chase me either, because I consume a lot fewer calories when I barely ever move to get everything I need. And if what I want to do is live in a virtual reality, well, I can just lay back like this and go, oh, wait, this is my VR helmet. Do you recognize this brand?
I can't tell from what I'm seeing. No, what is that?
It's a Brio head massager. You just put it on and it just does this to your scalp. It's the best VR experience I have ever had. I will wear this on my head before I'll wear a VR device. Sorry, I'm being rude to my guests,
Well, the
but
Matrix has got you, Alex. The
I
Matrix has
know,
got you.
right?
You could be what you think you're looking at a screen right now? You think that's air you're breathing? You're actually in a pod somewhere being fed these digital impulses.
Yeah,
And you need to get outside and see the real world.
yeah,
No,
I get
I
that
guess
a
the
lot.
counter argument is people do need to interact from time to time to go shopping, buy their groceries, to play with children,
Do we
to
though?
go exploring, you know,
You know how I play with my
and
children? It's all they want to do.
will there be
Hey, kids want to go
factories?
play? Yeah, let's go play games together. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know it's tragic.
Well, from time to time, you have to go wolf hunting and cutting logs that are blocking the roads. As I right, so I follow
You
your
follow
media,
it?
and
You know I'm Alaskan, so it's the weirdest thing ever for me to live down here in a metaverse. Like, my wife has a T-shirt that says the indoorsy type, right? Um, yes, it's a great
and yet,
transition from living
how
in
many
nature.
chainsaws do you own? You have chainsaws?
4. I own 4
Okay.
chainsaws. I'm not saying how many of
You
them
you
work
are
because I
not the
use them.
indoor person you profess to be. I mean, you are quite the outdoors, man as well, right? You go
I'm a
hunting
very
wolves and
confused individual, is what I am. I'm very torn, cross-wired. Well, so are you, Mr. R&D guy. You gonna when are you throwing away your horse in order to live in an XR world?
I'm actually shopping for a new horse. If there's anybody around who has an Irish fox hunter type, gray, I'm looking for one.
Why
So
aren't you just
yeah.
wearing your XR horse sim and call it good? Don't you? Why don't you just get? Aren't you just waiting for the brain implant horse experience?
When you get on a horse's back and tell them you can run as fast as you want right now, it's a really thrilling sensation. I'm addicted to that. So
Hmm.
yeah, but you got to pay for horses are not cheap. In the Blade Runner 2049 world, a wooden horse is worth more than 1,000 horses or something. There's still a natural world out there that offers the
Not for
experiences,
long.
whether it's shooting or sailing. um, Kids play games to get access to these fantasy experiences that they can't enjoy in real life. And I think you've talked before about how VR doesn't satisfy ultimately, or XR,
No.
because you can't touch the items that you're viewing. And the tactile sensations of wind and heat and
Hmm.
that our bodies are designed to,
And
and to require
acceleration.
that other, yeah, acceleration. Very,
Yeah.
very true.
Yeah. I don't
The sense we
believe.
don't often talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. The really important sense of acceleration, or the sense, which is the feeling of time travel, by the way, um,
Hmm.
doesn't it really is, right? If you ever want to know what does time travel feel like, it's Einstein would say mathematically, it's what acceleration feels like. Anytime you feel acceleration, your velocity through time is slowing in exchange for your velocity in space. So you're always moving at the speed of light. Actually, sorry, this, by the way, is a Lagrangian set of equations, represent fields, no relativity in it, to be clear. Never been unified. I know that just before anybody shouts me down. By the way, you're a Mitchell Kaiku guy, whereas I'm a
It's
more of
you.
a
It's your cock. Yeah.
See, you can pronounce
Sabine.
his name. I'm a Sabine Hassenfelder guy, and she hates that guy. She cannot. She has nothing but contempt every time she's on an interview with Mishu Kaku. She thinks Mishu Kaku is the biggest idiot she's ever met.
I watch Sabine too. I don't really, I actually put on Sabine when I want to fall asleep because I can't stay with the quant. She recently had an analysis of the Giza Plateau, uh,
Oh,
the
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 points.
structures. Yeah, and she's a really strong physicist. And I did terrible at physics, but I
Yeah.
do admire the people that that pursue these theories, and you can keep up with the math and the theories of physics. But yeah, I do think that uh, I like to believe in the future that Michio Kaku paints for us, because I think it's grounded at least in some level of physics. I
Well,
think
Semyon's
Elon Musk's
German, so they
background is
live in
in
the.
physics too.
Elon Musk's not a physicist. He's a businessman. Does he even have an engineering degree? I don't think he does. Does Musk have an engineering degree? Let's see. When the I hate to let me see. I'll make a prediction. All right. Let me see here. I'm going to bet Elon Musk is not an engineer. Does I'll tell you why. Does Elon Musk have an engineering degree? Okay. No, Elon Musk does not have an engineering degree. He holds
What degree does
a
Bill Gates have?
Oh no, wait, he holds a Bachelor of Arts in Physics and a Bachelor in Science and Econ. Okay, so a Bachelor of Arts in Physics. That's an engineer. That's a STEM degree, I guess I should have said. Sorry, what were you saying?
Well, Bill Gates famously dropped out of Harvard, right,
Harvard was
to
not,
start a
yeah.
business.
Well, it's that,
And
that
you know, a lot of people in the early days of graphics and computer science just taught themselves because you couldn't go to a school
yeah,
and get the current
yeah.
information, right? So the
I
current
have no
knowledge.
degree. I'm self-physicsed, right? So all the 3D graphics and mathematics I had to learn to do CGI stuff is just reading the textbooks, right? So no, I'm not, but people who are physicists or have been trained, their minds work a certain way and they talk a certain way. And so when you hear Bill Gates and Elon Musk talk futurism, they don't register to me as people who are deeply immersed in any kind of mathematical or physics purity per se. Gates is a pretty rigid, religious reasoner, um, although Musk says this about himself, he's a very Jobsian kind of character, and when he says that in order to be as successful as he is, you have to master two complementary domains. In his case, engineering and business, and that people who can master these two completely different domains are immensely is it's a requirement to be as immensely successful as he is. So when I look at his degrees, I go, oh, okay, actually that makes sense. But when I hear him talking about physics and some of his Mars fantasies, he does sound a lot more like a 12-year-old science fiction buff than a scientist to me. Um,
Fair enough. Yeah, I think terraforming. I think his transgender daughter was just making fun of his terraforming Mars. I would like to see
yeah,
somebody talk about the realistic amount of time it might take to do something like that.
yeah, that's
But
a pretty stupid idea, right? But
well,
but
on a millennium scale, maybe it makes sense. He's just wants
millennium.
I think Musk's attitude is like, let's get started. Let's do.
No, I
We've been to
love
the
that.
moon. What's next?
Well,
Yeah,
you remember Eric Engstrom, rest his soul,
yes.
because the funny thing is, of course, I'm up online talking about DirectX with people like you and I had taken credit for it. And Eric and Craig used to always take issue with me getting all the credit for the stuff they built, which, they certainly deserve an equal proportion. But I take the trouble to take credit for it. But the other thing was that it never would have succeeded without Craig was ruthlessly pragmatic. And as a consequence, he was, of the three of us, the most brilliant and productive engineer, but not imaginative and not ambitious in the same ways we were. So he never would have, on his own, gone, let's go do something crazy. And Eric Engstrom was batshit delusional, brilliant, but crazy, in the kind of Muskian way. And so, on the same time, you could fairly observe that guy's crazy. That's never going to happen. Because he'd go for it, we did things nobody ever would have accomplished that fell short of his delusions, but were progress. And so, I think I don't. I think I've told a couple stories about Engstrom before, but I mean, you remember Eric pretty well. He'd love to give you a
Yes.
hard time. He was the one who would mock you guys constantly for your 3D decelerators, wouldn't he?
Yeah, Eric was a great guy. He wouldn't pull punches. If he thought you were thinking wrong, he would tell you so. but he would
Hmm.
also listen to your response and challenge you. And I remember pitching some vision of the future back in probably 1995, and he said, "We've already run that simulation," which I thought was a hilarious way of saying we've already gamed out the result of taking
Yeah,
that path, and if you go that path, it
yeah,
doesn't succeed. And I think that the one of the strengths of the team that you guys had, I mean, you were almost like a band of brothers, right? You could all trust
yeah.
each other, and but you would also challenge each other's ideas. And
Yeah.
so
It's a polite way of saying
uh
we fought
if
constantly.
well, Angstrom would not agree to go along with an idea that he thought was stupid,
Yeah.
and yet he seemed to have unlimited energy to try and tackle. Once he had a goal in mind, he was like a bull terrier or something. He would just keep working
Oh
on
yeah.
that goal.
Yeah.
And I think about things he said from time to time, and yeah, we I think we all miss him.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
No, I do too. He
recent,
was
how often do you talk to Craig?
not as much. He and I worked together on a biotech company. We're doing this is a cell storage company for storing your stem cells in a bottle for all time. Genetic analysis company together. He's over running the e-commerce market at Amazon these days, and again, we're how do you phrase it? It's as you remember. We're actually all of us were probably Engstrom was the most social of us, and people thought I was social, but I'm actually as big a hermit as Craig is. So we see each other rarely, but it's like old times whenever we do. We're very content to hide in our little worlds and have no communication. We already know what we're thinking. We don't have to talk or keep up. It's not necessary.
I remember Eric, and I remember that some of his ideas were outlandish, and one in particular is that he had a dream of starting his own city in India, and
Yes.
he would have living pods where someone could work, and it would be a circular house, like a yurt almost, and
Yes.
it would be designed to be um, a certain. He said the right size of this should be the same diameter of
The
this
Starship
original
Enterprise
series Star
deck,
Trek Enterprise
a
bridge,
little
right?
over 32 feet
And
in
I
diameter.
always
Yep.
thought, right. And I remember this is a wacky idea. This is crazy. But I think he was successful enough at Microsoft to go actually uh, make this dream a reality. And I think years ago I looked up online, where is this village that he created? I think
It's called New
it
Orville in
actually
Hyderabad, India.
okay, New Orville.
New Orville in Hyderabad, India. It's still there. There's a street called St. John's Way.
Really?
Yes. It's the widest street there.
So, now I would have expected anybody but Eric Engstrom to come up
Hmm.
with this idea. But
Oh
this was
yeah.
his dream that he actually carried out. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it was ever a commercial success. There was
No.
another story that I think I heard that he had a property with all sorts of ideas of like equipment and stuff. It was like a big warehouse.
He has a
And it
huge
was
lab. Yeah.
a huge lab. And you guys would get together and tell stories, reminisce, and play with,
Yep.
I don't know, flamethrowers or machine guns. I don't know, but
We would sit in
it
his
was
freezing
I don't
cold
know enough about.
warehouse surrounded by his science experiments, his cold fusion devices, his subspace propellers, his next generation fuel efficient spark plugs. And we'd smoke cigars and drink the custom whiskey he and Craig had made and shipped in by the barrel, and just surrounded by junk, just tons of machine parts. And he got weirdly obsessed with hydrofoaming, and so all he had were giant explosive machines with bladders that were for hydroforming plastics to make cell phone cases that were smart, that clipped onto your phone and added value to them. He just yeah, Eric was a mad
Wow.
genius inventor. He had quite the laboratory. And he'd buy all kinds of like construction equipment he didn't have a use for. So he had like D9 bulldozers and forklifts and stuff out there that
Huh.
He drove around and moved things for some purpose that only he understood.
It's interesting. I've known a number of engineers who have kind of mastered their craft or their science, computer science, and then they feel the need to take their mind and apply it to other areas like bulldozers and learning about the kind of legacy technology, and I
Yeah.
think that there's a need for people to explore that. You haven't
Hmm.
talked much about Craig Eisler, but
Yeah.
before he got involved in the DirectX project, he was on the Microsoft compiler team,
He
I
was
believe, right?
he was at the Watcom. He's Canadian. He was at
Mhm.
Watcom working on the Watcom compilers, and he made the Watcom DOS extenders. So he was already a bit of a celebrity among DOS gamers because all of them used his Watcom DOS extender to get more addressable memory for their DOS games back then. So he came. We were all remember we all three of us came from the compiler, the Microsoft Tools Group. We Eric and Craig are C++ compiler developers. I was a Lisp and PostScript developer. So making languages and compilers. So we were all tools or operating system engineers in that group. So yes, he was hired from Watcom into evangelism, which was in the Microsoft Tools Group. We were the guys who made Visual Studio. Um, but that's the organization Microsoft put their evangelists in to promote Microsoft tools and technology.
Ah. Well, I remember Craig as just being a phenomenal coder and
Yeah,
could just write things so quickly.
the
And
best we've
I don't
ever
know how
seen.
much coding at that time. Really? Yeah.
Oh God,
I, I,
yeah,
I think that's not hyperbole there. He was just amazingly quick,
I've never
and
seen another
his
engineer like
APIs
him.
made sense.
Yeah,
So,
he was just brilliant and prolific. He used to sit and he would do it with such focus. He would sit because remember computers were much slower back then. So he would sit with multiple computers and monitors, and he would, because he didn't want to wait for something to build, he would go to one part of the code and work on this area, build, and then he'd work on another piece of code on another
hmm.
computer on something else, build. And he'd literally just do that, and he'd do it for 14, 16 hours a day without blinking. And he did that. He made the direct input, and most of direct draw was created by Craig that way. And he was the one who shipped what the precursor to DirectX, which was WinG, by doing that. So he's an inhumanly talented engineer. One of the sad things about great engineers is we get pushed into marketing or management overhead roles, which is I think, a tremendous use of our talent, a misuse of our talents because they're usually better people at managing, and great engineers are very scarce.
Yeah, but I understand the pull. At certain point, you as a software engineer, you get to this point of like, well, I could work all day every day for a week and only produce so much. But if I can
Yeah.
marshal the resources of several people, then you get the kind of parallelism and hopefully uh,
Yeah.
multiply your output in that
But
way.
if you're the pinnacle of engineering, you're an introverted incel who hates people, promoted to the most senior ranks of managers, where your entire day is spent in nothing but rage and frustration, trying to get a 1% improvement in the disastrous quality of an army of people's code, and resisting the urge to go, if I just did this by myself, it would be done better sooner than all 20 of you working on it. And I think that's the world probably Craig has spent most of his career in since then. He actually went on to being a Microsoft executive. He went all the way through the ranks and so forth. Again, and when you talk to him today, he's very managerial, very focused on team and culture and all that. And just go, man, you were such a brilliant engineer. What a waste.
Happened to you, yeah.
Yeah.
But the combination of the three of you, your personalities, they often talk about the Beatles and how when the Beatles came together, the
Why do you
phenomenon
keep
was
making
their
this conversation
personalities.
about me? I'm trying to interview you, Ken. You're being all. I talk about me on my show all the time. Now, it's very flattering, but this is. I wanted to get your memories of it all because they are. You were the one other than the three of us. You were really the only other witness who was there day one, Ken. You and a few people from the game industry, right? Um,
Yeah, I had a mission. I had young kids at that time, and I wanted to kind of the super Bubsy idea was show their kids that their dad was a game developer and was connected, and that it was a game that they could play. So, my daughter Jenny Nicholson is a famous YouTuber. She's
Yeah.
extremely well known on the YouTube VTuber market, and she's got a YouTuber market. I shouldn't say VTuber. VTuber
Yeah.
means virtual tuber, but she has like 10 plush Bubsies from that era that are now almost priceless. And it's just
uh,
because her dad, loved his kids, decided,
Worked
I
on
was going to do
Bubsy.
something memorable for their childhood. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same way, right? I got a house full of kids crashing around upstairs up there, and so I'm very ups. I am personally upset at the Apple and other people's modern gaming experiences for children. It really infuriates and motivates me, for the same reasons, right? Yours are all grown up now, so maybe you forgot. You're like, I want to go live in cyberpunk world now. I don't. Who gives a damn about children anymore?
Well, when kids they get overjoyed, playing these games and seeing the
Yeah,
character, and it's you seeing that look in their eyes when they discover the magic trick, or
yeah,
they're fooled by the magic.
yeah.
It gives you a feeling of celebrity or something if you can make that happen for them. And is that your motivation for Playcast? You want to
In my
be in the game market?
Well, the weird thing about you'd think I actually wanted to go be in the science market. I was built near it. I was off supercomputing and doing radio astronomy and searching for extraterrestrials, and I had way transcended this mundane world of gaming. And then COVID hit. Um, and so I was in living in New Zealand. We were back in the US to have child six, and just because my wife had had enough Wild West child birthing experiences in other countries, so she wanted the Bellevue Overlake child experience, and so we came back for that, and COVID hit, and we got trapped in the U.S. And so I was down here in the basement, which is my happy place. I'm happy to be, forced to code all the time and have nothing and have no social contact. So I loved the COVID era from that point of view. I'm very tragic and all that being trapped in the house, I'm sure, but I enjoyed it. But while we were all locked down, I had a big science consulting. We were working on genomics and military and shooting down drones and all kinds of cool stuff. But when the lockdown came, myself and old friend Trey Overton, a kid friend from Alaska, who I'd been working with on these big consulting projects, we're in the basement and just going, "Hey, I got this crazy idea. Why don't we work on it?" And so we ended up spending a lot of time just during lockdown building the Playcast tech. And my biggest, motivation and frustration with the modern game market is, one, I see that point of collapse, and I love tipping points, which is what DirectX was, right? It was a big tipping point. You and I heralded a major tipping point in the game industry, and we're in another one right here. It's another big one, and that's exciting to me. And I do have a house full of young kids, and I don't have anything to prove anymore. So I do love working on the big science stuff. I mean, that's definitely where my heart is as a physicist. But the consumer tech and kids entertainment and pioneering the stuff, I just love working on it because the trouble with looking for ET with radio telescopes is you'll probably be dead of old age before you find them. um, it's not as rewarding as banging out revolutionary consumer tech, and you just get this whole rewarding unfolding of adoption. So Playcast started down here in the basement, and ironically, it was Bing Gordon who called me up and during COVID, and he had wanted to buy Wild Tangent when he was running EA, when he was a big exec at EA, one of the founders of Electronic Arts, and said, "Hey, Alex, would you be up for building a Sims killer for me, an online Sims?" And I was very flattered, and I said, I think you're right. I think it'd be great, and I'd love to take you up on it. But my heart has never really been in making games. My heart's always really in making enabling platforms. And I said the Roblox thing that happened and succeeded that made Roblox huge, that era is over. You can't do that again. The market's changed too much. So if you wanted to build a revolutionary new gaming platform in this era, in this market, I said, it looks something a lot more like Playcast. And he goes, well, he goes, I'm a venture capitalist with Kleiner Perkins these days. I wanted to invest in you when you were a wild tangent. Can I, invest in you now? And so I called up Trey and I go, hey, want to start a company while we're locked up in the basement? Um, so that's how we ended up starting Playcast. And I was just showing off my cursor, which is, I'm very excited about. It was a very hard cursor to make work. No,
It's a nice cursor.
it's better than the OBS cursor, right? I've got the scale right. Um, Sorry. So, that got me going in this, and then I got a house full of kids, so it is fun. My son, who's 8, comes back from elementary. He's at this age where he doesn't know that the only reason I have more kids is to experiment on them socially, to stay in touch with the gamers of today. So he's into gaming, and he's playing with all his little friends, and they all gossip about games. And he comes home one day, and he goes, and I didn't hear this conversation. I wasn't present, but his mom told me. He goes, Dad famous for games something? And she goes, well, what did you hear? And she goes, oh, somebody at school said Dad made the Xbox. And mom's like, well, yeah, sort of, yeah, he's famous. And he goes, Dad makes games. And she was like, well, I don't know how to explain it, but you're welcome to talk to him about it. So I got my son going, why do the kids at school say you're a BFD in gaming, Dad? And I can't explain. He's too young, but it is kind of fun. It is. I've got an older son who is diamond level League of Legends player who, when he was a kid, was like, whatever, Xbox, Dad. But um, nowadays, he all his friends want to come out and hang out with us because we're the cool house. So it is fun. So yeah, I guess the way to put it is that building consumer tech and gaming again is my favorite retirement hobby, given that I've always been a workaholic. So I do like
Right.
and I love sitting down here making the stuff, and I've made some amazing stuff. I'll show you sometime when we're not doing an interview. um, because it is good science fiction tech. And I know you're, like I said, you're doing the VR thing. I assert to you that I
That's
can
our
deliver video in zero latency over any distance, as far as you'll ever know. Because I think I go, yep, it'll be a long time before the AI is cheap enough and powerful enough to render Diablo, except not sucking in real time. But I think that your basic ARM processor is going to do a great job of guessing what your responses to input are going to be faster than you are, and faster than the speed of light, which is fast enough to get the job done. Um, that would be. I think I can make an AI Markov chain that fools you into thinking you're having a negative latency experience pretty easily in the short term.
really,
Hmm.
really running on a lightweight GPU
Yeah.
in your pocket.
Yeah, trivially, I would assert. I can here. Watch me. I'll prove it to you. I'll convince you of the case. Right. So if you're running a game at 60 frames a second, how fast can you click if you try to click as fast as you can?
Well, I think it's going to be once once every fifth of a second, something like tenth of a second, something like that.
It's about right. It's pretty slow, right? So that means that I can be
Mhm.
90% accurate if I just guess that you're not going to click anything for the next 9 frames or next 5 frames after you click something. So I could make a prediction algorithm that was maybe 80 or 90% accurate just by accurately predicting when you're not going to click because you're so slow. We are so slow. And then predicting what you are going to click. Um, is probably going to be like 97 to 98% accurate of being right, 2% of being wrong, and that I can encode that information into video that contains both the most probable right click and the second and third most probable wrong clicks in the same video stream so that they all arrive on your computer before you've even clicked and made your choice. Before you even know what you're going to click, the results of any possible click you're actually likely to perform are already on your computer. And so when you click, you're just picking a frame that's already in your video cache. And I think that's easy to do on a cell phone with the right, code. And it's not a big AI model. That's a little one. Um, the
How
video
many video
encoding is more
streams are you going to
advanced
be
science.
sending?
What's that?
How many video streams how many parallel video streams are you going to send?
Well, we don't. How do we send video stream now, Ken? Video guy? Do we send video streams full of frames, or do we send wavelet encoded streams that are in highest coefficient to lowest coefficient order?
Well, each frame is encoded, and then you have frame differencing, right? So even H.265 is doing that kind of wavelet encoding, and then you're trying to encode just the differences from frame to frame, but
All right.
you're still sending frame to frame. And if you have all of these branching opportunities, you like, let's say you're sending 5 video streams, and I suddenly make a click over here. Oh, you need to be switched over to this other stream instead of this one. um, Netflix will change you to different encoded video streams on the fly while you're watching a movie. It'll say,
Yeah.
"Oh, your bandwidth's getting narrower. I need to give you a lower resolution stream,"
Do the
and you
video
don't notice
codecs
it when it.
really send frame differences, or do they send motion compensation vector differences?
Well, H.265 has some of both, right?
Yeah,
So
optical
if
flow.
you optical flow, right? Yeah,
So what is
I
the
don't
so
know
if
if
you're
it makes
playing a
sense to
first
get
person
into the
shooter,
minutia of the
well, if you're playing a
HEVC
first
codec.
person shooter like Fortnite, what is the probability that the next thing you do is facing the complete opposite direction an instant later?
Um, well, it's it's going to be on a frame to frame basis. The usual amount that you move is not very much, right? But
Right.
there are cases where, like,
That
you
is
do a
there is
sudden
high
180
continuity.
turn, right?
Right.
So in video encoding, you have to have a keyframe every once in a while to, like,
Yeah.
refresh everything, right?
Well, that's old
So,
school. Now it's
um,
motion compensation vector. So that increasingly it's not a keyframe anymore. It's a motion compensation vector because the reason video compression works over many frames is that the video quality, the inherent assumption is that your experience with video is inherently very continuous. And that means the differences between looking left and looking right are both very close, small differences after off the last frame. So that difference key you're describing when it's a tiny time interval in a continuous frame is a very small amount of data in either case. And these modern video and formats that are designed to encode many levels of quality in the same stream could equally be storing multiple motion compensation vectors that predict that you're going to look a half a degree left instead of half a degree right and be very small amounts of data, not multiple concurrent full encoded video streams. So I think it's for a vast, because of the nature of way video compression works, it's quite practical to imagine gaming compression architectures that encode all the possible scenarios from the most likely to the least likely in proportionate detail off of what you would call a keyframe efficiently, such that the stream might be 1.3 times larger and contain three possible outcomes or clicks, and everything in between because they're continuous motion vector analogs from one another. That is, if you say I'm pushing my thumbstick 10% or 15%, it's all in the same direction at a different motion vector. So your DLSS4 frame interpolation is all going to be in the linear path of that direction, if that makes any sense.
I'm following what you're saying, and I think that, you know, I don't want to say too much about what we're doing, but you can subsidize a video frame into, or
Yeah,
subdivide a video frame into 4 quadrants, say, and have one quadrant being what's the most likely next click stream, and
right.
you could break it down, but each quadrant is going to be limited to how much information it can carry because you've got 4 video streams into one. And I think you're talking about some future evolution of HEVC where both the sender and the receiver understand that you're going to have these 4 quadrants that are going to have multiple streams that they're trying to predict. But we
Yeah.
see with TVs, you see with even video games where, uh, if there are certain pathological cases of the content that is being streamed that breaks down the codec.
Oh
It,
yeah,
it
yeah,
violates the codec's
yeah.
ability
And
to
then they just send
compensate.
another frame, right? But
Right, right. But you do see that kind of jerky,
right.
as a pan is
Oh
going
yeah.
on.
But remember that what I'm saying is that the only reason we say cloud native gaming has latency is because you're talking about a set of games, zero of which are designed to be aware of their latency. Whereas we talk about a multi-billion dollar multiplayer game industry where the players are famously obsessed with latency, and yet the game's really rendering at a model loop of 20 frames a second max. League of Legends, and people are going, I need a 400 frame a second monitor. You go, the game's not actually running that fast, right? Doesn't matter. There's the range of precision in which your click matters is actually very wide. And so in that world, the ability to create the illusion in well in advance of all the possible things, so I just spent a decade working on radio astronomy, right? And in radio astronomy, the whole reason we encode video the way we do is because your computer used to be not very powerful, and so the people designing these video encoding standards did it on the assumption that you had to have the cheapest, crappiest, lowest end hardware for everybody available for that encoding standard to be successful. So the compression we're very impressed with is quite crappy. We know how to compress data better. We just don't because it's not practical to get a large volume of cheap enough components to make it a standard. But over in radio astronomy land, where the scientists go, we're just going to get the biggest computer anybody's ever made. Well, in that world, we go, we're just going to Fourier transform that entire video into the time domain, and then in frequency space, or out of time domain into frequency space in just one giant block. And in that, we can encode all of the coefficients recursively based on their probability distribution, and we'll just use a cray for that. And then NVIDIA will make that run on your cell phone next week, right? So yeah, I've been exposed to that. But yeah, so I think that we're in a window where where yes, the second the game and those edge cases you're talking about, what's the difference if the game knows it's doing this? Then the encoder is never surprised, is it, Ken? There's no point where the game designer is going, let's shock the encoder by doing something it can't anticipate. So you're used to a world where cloud native gaming means the technology essential to delivering the game experience is completely oblivious to the game, which exists nowhere else in game design. Everybody else in game design engineering going, that's a stupid fucking thing to do. Let's never do that. That makes a shitty game. Right. That's why we don't do that. So the whole idea of cloud native gaming where it's disassociated offends my engineering sensibility because of course that's stupid and doesn't work.
I'm often motivated by what the technology that I think I want and what I would like to see happen in the
Oh,
future, and then what future's experience that I want to have happen. And I've been pretty good about pursuing that. At least it allows me to chase after the technology that I think is the most interesting.
that's
And
funny.
I want you to imagine that in the future, your augmented reality glasses aren't going to be just running a game. You're going to be running a dozen games or 100 games that are all ready to stream to you depending on where you are in the shopping mall or where you are in the city. And they will have to predict when you're looking at this store how to stream the appropriated sales content of
This sounds
what
no fun at
meals are
all to
here.
me, Ken.
And then you turn around, you look over there, and there's Blade Runner 2049. I think that when
Yeah.
the directors like John Carpenter
Yeah.
and Denis Villeneuve, when they predict the future, they're trying to do run the simulation of like where does all this technology lead, and the computer rendered girlfriend appearing in the city square when you're buying noodles, coming up to you and talking to you. They are trying to extrapolate where holograms get to, where AI in the cloud gets to, and I think that um, that those market or the city street scenes in um, in Blade Runner 2049 are one dystopian vision of the future. But I think it's a bit more likely than say Ready Player One where everybody's
That was
in
a
one
terrible
big
movie
video
too.
game world.
Oh yeah. Well, so this has been this is a great interview, and we've kind of taken in one cut, and I really don't want to do a lot of editing. So I have to restrain myself from saying some really hilarious things in response to your view of the future of virtual girlfriends. Um, but I suffice it to say that I'm skeptical that that particular experience is what anybody really wants from them, and the societal consequences of delivering what people really want are even more dystopian in my mind than what the 2049 movie creators envisioned. And I think that, unfortunately, one of the requirements of a great movie is that the circumstances have to be interesting enough to turn into a commercially successful movie, whereas a great number of things that happen in reality don't make good movies because they result in instant tragic endings. That is, nobody makes a movie where the hero gets killed at the beginning. Well, there are some weird, time travel and retroactive ones, but by and large, so when I look at those movies, I go, I appreciate the medium and the market for which they must exist, and the type of, like, nobody can write a book that just ends with and then everybody died who was going to be in my book. So that's the same with the car driving thing. As I was going, if I can make a car so smart that I can sit in the back seat and have a nap as it drives me to work, then I must live in a future where I don't need to go to work in a car because I can stay at home and use Zoom. I bet you Zoom happens faster than a Tesla car that can actually drive itself. And as a consequence, by the time anybody makes self driving cars, I'm not going to give a shit, and neither are you. That's my rational problem with some of these great sci-fi ideas. Right? I told you I went and drove one of the Waymo cars in San Francisco.
Ah, yeah, that was hilarious.
Oh my God. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
well, I worked for both an automotive radar company and an automatic
of course you did.
automotive lidar company. And I've been through that. And Elon Musk was
Yeah,
right about don't need radar or lidar, and he's
yeah,
proved it. I mean, he has
yeah,
working solution. If you look at those Waymo cars, they have
yeah,
4 or 5 lidar scanners on them, hugely expensive,
yeah.
and uh, you know, how many of those cars are people going to buy? I
They're
don't
all
think there are many.
Jags. They bought all Jaguars. Like the cars, might as well get a Jag because the LiDAR thing on the roof, the Ghostbusters attachment is so expensive. Let's just throw in a Jag after you add that thing to it. I don't know. It was
Yeah, it's an electric Jag, by the way. Yeah, right.
oh, is it electric? So
Yeah.
I ride in those things in San Francisco, and the one thing I know with absolute perfect, pristine future clarity is they will be out of business in 10 years.
Yeah, cruise automation, probably the same thing's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
You have to make it inexpensive. The
Yep.
the problem with radar was that radar sees a manhole cover and it looks like a brick wall because it's so reflective, and
All
you get the
right.
same problems with lidar, phantom reflections that can confuse the
Yeah.
software.
There's a whole lot of information that's in the human head sensory packet that until we tried to make self-driving cars, we took for granted. We didn't appreciate. Like the thing that drives me crazy to go, it turns out that the inner ear is really essential to being able to see things, especially when you're moving fast. So, in order for your brain to see your brain, our eyes are flat. We have shitty depth vision. We're nearly flat eyed. We have nearly no perspective. So, without parallax motion and without a sense of acceleration, it's actually probably much harder for our brain to see in stereo, especially when things are moving rapidly. And when things are moving rapidly, the brain has less time to make decisions, or splat against a wall. So the brain has to be even more efficient at perceiving and analyzing depth at velocity than when you're strolling along gradually, right? And so when I see that stuff, I go, man, all of these guys, by thinking it's a vision based thing, isolated from the rest of the sensory packet, and then you're confused why you can't figure it out and you need this giant sonar thing and it's still not good enough. It's because you failed to understand the way the human head synthesizes all kinds of information to produce vision. Right? It's not just a pair of vision isn't just a pair of cameras, and they're going to keep having cars that can't drive themselves until they figure that out, I suspect.
Well, I don't know if you've got yourself a Tesla yet, but I got one recently, and I pay for the full self-driving subscription, and I turn it on all the time, everywhere I go, and I just love seeing an oncoming difficulty and thinking, okay, how are you going to solve this problem? There's like a car that's in the way. You're going to have to go out into the other lane of traffic, oncoming traffic, in order to get around it. And it's amazing. It's very relaxing to just turn over. Occasionally, you have to say, "No, that was wrong," and fix it. But those occurrences are less and less. And they're going to launch the Cybercad soon, and that's no steering wheel cars. So, and I think we talked about Elon Musk being a physicist, and I think physicists have a way of thinking of everything in as a numerical problem. I think you're great with math, and that's kind of your physicist mindset too. But I think Elon Musk must have like sat down with a pencil or something and said, "Okay, computers are getting this smarter, faster. Cameras are getting cheaper. Okay, so in about this amount of time is when the cars are going to be able to drive themselves." And he may have missed it by 5 or more years, but he's proven it right. So
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
big
Well,
fan.
it's just I don't know. There's also not a political show because they go, oh, but he may have gone, self-driving cars by some other company going to do great because people are burning ours down. They all hate me now. I didn't anticipate that. Yeah, no, that's yeah, I guess again, the problem is I go, I sit here in the basement and can't think of a reason to leave my chair ever anymore. And the less I get out of this chair, the happier I am. So I'm converging on all this technology is enabling me to barely move. I can just sip my meals out of a straw and call my wife and kids when I want to see them. And then when my kids want to socialize with me, it's like, Dad, can we sit in your lap and play stick fight? Well, sure, we can play a game on a computer when daddy's not on the computer making game technology. Um,
Don't you want to get
Mm.
outside and hunt that werewolf and
I love my
cut
werewolf
down
problem.
cut,
Yeah, the
yeah.
werewolf is
And
exciting for me.
but also, actually, I think you have a pull for the outdoor experiences too, the
Oh yeah.
cutting up a tree that's fallen in the way. I mean,
I'm totally
what gets you
disgusted
out of
with
your chair to go
myself.
do that instead of
Yeah, at the same time as I describe my lifestyle to you, I'm totally disgusted with myself, Ken. Absolutely. Of course, I was having fun out hunting for my werewolf, and my business partner showed up here, and he brought his drone. So we've got a date to go drone hunting over the property to find the werewolf. So that almost spoils the fun
well,
of going out with in the woods and being exposed to werewolf attack.
you going out in the woods, you have to leave your computer where you're comfortable. What if you could take your computer with you? Yeah, this new phenomenon I'm learning about called vibe coding, where you don't actually have to type any C++ code. You just say, "Write me some code that does this," while you're out hunting werewolves, and then you say, "Okay, now run that. Actually, make about 10 variations for me and run that." So you don't have to leave your computer. You'll be able to take it with you everywhere you go.
Yeah, I don't think you understand the nature of my relationship with the machine. I don't leave my I'm not with my computer when I'm here. I am inside a different world that is enabled by my computer. And I reluctantly leave it. When I leave my computer, it's because I intend to leave my computer behind. But that's just I realize that, like I said, I'm totally disgusted with myself because thought I was a badass wilderness Alaskan. The whole, I married a city girl, and of course, so she's in the indoorsy type. So the degree to which the frequency with which I get out and do anything Alaskany is embarrassingly scarce. And I hesitate to tell people I used to, my idea of a good time when I was at Microsoft was going on a Harley ride out to Sturgis and just sleeping under bridges or on rocks in the middle of streams in the
Oh,
middle. I thought that
you
was
just
fantastic.
reminded me of your Hummer, the Hummer ride you took us all on.
Oh God, did I take you on
That
a
was
Hummer ride?
exciting.
When was
Yes.
this?
You, this was on Microsoft campus. It was some event. And you said you just got a Hummer. I think it was before you got a Harley, but it was this beautiful new Hummer vehicle. And you said, let's go have fun on Microsoft campus. And there were four of us in there, and you proceeded to terrorize us by driving us down vertical cliffs into ditches and then backing up right out of it. That thing was a phenomenal vehicle. Whatever happened to your Hummer?
I sold it. I thought it was really cool until I realized that I was single and the only people it attracted were other truck driver types. It's like, hey, is that a Hummer? I used to drive one in the army, so it wasn't exactly your chick magnet back then. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. That was when Microsoft campus was all under construction, so the whole place was just one giant off-road party waiting to happen. It was the best of times. Now it's all like its own towering city state over there. No place to go for a Hummer ride anymore. Oh God, I did that to you. I nearly drowned a group of Intel executives with that thing. I don't know if you ever heard that story.
No, but that probably would have been worth doing.
I
No,
said,
I'm
yes,
kidding.
it would have. I
Uh,
know it would have been no loss, actually, in retrospect. I might have been applause for that. I go, oops, accidentally drowned five Intel execs, and they're like, "Hi, too bad you couldn't fit more in the Hummer." Yeah,
no, they'll just replace them with five identical other ones.
I know. It's such a shame that they've declined to the degree they have. It's sad to see them go. Yeah. Well, so this has been a lot of fun, Ken. We should do this more often. I'll probably chop this into a couple episodes because we have some memory lane and then we have sci-fi. We should actually do more sci-fi speculation because I think we have ideologically opposing physicist preferences.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that would be fun. And it might be more appealing to people who aren't just into digital archaeology. They want to hear what we think about where things are going with the current
Oh
technology.
yeah,
Be fun.
because we have the best opinions. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking so much of your day. It was great catching up with you. It was a lot of fun, and it did answer a lot of questions about that era. And I don't remember what was going on. And Ken was there too. I forgot all much stuff you were there for. So Ken Nicholson, ladies and gentlemen, OG DirectX guy from ATI in the pioneering days when graphics cards weren't called GPUs yet. Thanks a lot for joining us, Ken. It's good seeing you again, and I'll see you next time I'm down in California and hiding out with the young people at a gaming conference, and nobody knows me anymore. So I can. It's like being
Yeah.
incognito. Right? All these kids
Or maybe
talking to me like,
SIGGRAPH.
is SIGGRAPH? I heard it was just marketing crap these days. It used to be full of the physics. It was
Or
all
is it?
physicists when I was going, but do they still? You know, is it just on one more? All I think about physicists, SIGGRAPH these days is that one more motion capture or brain reading device nobody will ever use.
Look at Birds of a Feather, which were kind of like informal meetups where you could go talk with people on a specific, uh, subject like OpenGL or Vulkan or something. Sometimes those are fun, but
All right,
yeah, otherwise you could just read the papers, right?
when's the next one? Isn't the next one around here? So isn't like it in Seattle next this year or
Yeah,
something?
it's in Vancouver,
It's in
mid-August.
Vancouver. Are you coming up?
Yep,
Oh, maybe we
I'll be
should
there.
go to SIGGRAPH together. That'd be a load of fun then. We can road trip from here. It's just, a little north of the border here. See if we're not at war with
Okay,
Canada at that point. I think we might be.
let's hope that. Yeah. Well, yeah, this has been great, Alex.
All right.
It was a
Thank
lot
you
of
very
fun
much for
and
joining us, Ken.
always
You
great.
take care. Appreciate it. I'll edit
Okay.
this up in no time flat. See you soon. Bye bye.
Okay.